It was the question that made the whole world stop. A question so profoundly cruel that the very air in the courtroom seemed to curdle and die, leaving behind a vacuum of pure, stunned silence. The judge's face, which had been a mask of professional calm just moments before, was now completely, utterly frozen. Her gavel was hovering motionlessly over the block of wood, as if time itself had snagged on the jagged edges of their words. For me, 16-year-old Kayla Miller, it was the moment 10 years of quiet, suffocating suffering, of being meticulously taken apart piece by piece, finally came roaring into the blinding light. In that impossible silence, every patronizing comment, every dismissive wave of the hand, every hateful whispered insult I had ever endured finally found its echo, and the entire room, captive and horrified, was forced to listen. But my story with them, with Sarah and Tom Miller, didn't begin with that devastating question. It began with a promise, a sweet and hopeful whisper exchanged over lukewarm hot chocolate in a sterile beige-walled agency office that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and desperation. I was 6 years old, a little girl untethered, adrift in the unpredictable chaos of the foster care system, clutching a worn teddy bear and just hoping for an anchor in the storm. Sarah and Tom Miller were supposed to be that anchor. They looked like they'd been lifted directly from the pages of a glossy catalog selling perfect lives. Tom, with his meticulously styled sandy blonde hair and a broad, reassuring smile that felt safe. Sarah, with her impossibly kind eyes and a gentle laugh that sounded like a warm blanket on a cold night. They looked at me, a small, skinny black girl with wide, cautious eyes and intricate braids that my last foster mom had taken hours to lovingly weave, and they saw a daughter. At least, that's what I desperately wanted to believe. "We've waited so long for you, Kayla," Sarah had said, her hand resting softly on my shoulder. It was the first time in a long, long time that I didn't flinch from a touch. Tom knelt, bringing his face level with mine, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "We're going to give you the best life imaginable. A forever family. Forever." For a child who had only ever known temporary homes and bags packed in a hurry, forever sounded like the most beautiful, magical place in the world. I let myself believe in their magic. I let myself hope. The drive to their home was a blur of emerald green trees and perfectly manicured lawns zipping past the window of their spotless minivan, a world so different from the cracked pavement and bustling noise of the city I knew. Their house was at the end of a quiet, pristine cul-de-sac, a big 2-story colonial with a perfect white picket fence that gleamed in the afternoon sun. It was beautiful, but it was also unervingly silent. A deep, profound quiet that seemed to swallow every sound before it could fully form. As we got out of the car, I felt the first tiny, almost imperceptible shift. The easy smiles they had worn at the agency seemed a little tighter now, a little more strained at the edges. Sarah's eyes, which I had thought were so kind, flickered over me. My tightly coiled hair, my brown skin, the worn-out sneakers on my feet. It was just a glance, a fleeting micro-expression, but it was there. A flicker of something that looked a lot like disappointment. As if she'd ordered a delicate porcelain doll and a common rag doll had shown up instead. "Well, here we are," Tom announced, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful for the oppressive stillness. "Your new home." Sarah led me inside. The house was immaculate, a sterile sea of beige carpets and shiny polished wood floors. It felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit meticulously curated under the title, "The Perfect Suburban Life." She showed me to my room. It was painted a soft, chalky pink, with a large, frilly canopy bed and a long shelf lined with dolls. They all had straight, flaxen blonde hair and stared at me with vacant, unblinking blue eyes. That night, while Sarah helped me unpack the few belongings I owned from my little duffel bag, she picked up one of my worn-out, brightly colored t-shirts. She held it between her thumb and forefinger as if it were contaminated. "We'll have to get you some new things," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Things that are a bit more appropriate for our neighborhood." Later, as I sat on the edge of the big bed, she turned her attention to my hair. "Oh, honey," she sighed, her fingers tugging at one of my braids. The pull was sharp and unexpected, and it made my eyes water. "What are we going to do with this? It's so unruly." She let out a brittle little laugh that sounded like breaking glass. Don't you worry though. We'll fix you up. We'll make you look like you belong here. That was the first time I heard it. The quiet, insidious message that the way I had arrived, was fundamentally wrong. That I wasn't a daughter to be loved, but a project to be fixed. A piece of raw clay to be molded into their perfect white image. I stood in that suffocating pink room, surrounded by the silent judgment of those blonde-haired dolls, and felt the first cold, terrifying chill of belonging to a family that was already ashamed of me. The beautiful dream of forever was already starting to fray at the seams. Life in the Miller house was governed by a complex web of rules. These weren't rules that were ever written down or spoken aloud, but you were just supposed to know them, to feel them in the air. The main, unspoken rule was that my blackness was an inconvenience, a stubborn stain on their pristine white world that they were quietly, relentlessly determined to scrub out. This wasn't accomplished with screaming matches or overt cruelty. It was a slow, steady drip of tiny, toxic insults that wore down my identity, day by agonizing day. Started with my hair. My beloved braids, a connection to my culture and the last kind woman who had cared for me, were the first things to go. Sarah called them unprofessional and messy. One dreadful Saturday morning, she sat me down on a hard stool in the master bathroom, armed with a fine-toothed comb that had no business being anywhere near my hair and a bottle of detangler that smelled of harsh chemicals. It was agony. She had no idea what she was doing, just yanking and pulling with growing frustration, her sighs filling the sterile room. "Why can't it just be straight and simple like mine?" she'd mutter, more to herself than to me. Tears would stream down my face, part from the searing pain and part from the sting of her words. She would finally wrestle my hair back into a tight, severe ponytail that burned my scalp and pulled at the corners of my eyes, forcing my face into a permanent grimace. Every single morning became a battle, a painful, tear-filled reminder that a fundamental part of me was a problem that needed solving. Then they started policing the way I talked. I grew up in a vibrant, expressive Black community, and my speech had a rhythm, a musicality that was natural and comfortable to me. Tom, however, found this endlessly amusing. At the dinner table, especially when they had friends over, he would mimic me. "Kayla, pass the potatoes, please," he'd say, exaggerating my cadence and tone until it became a grotesque caricature. "You people talk so funny. Try sounding more American." Their guests would offer these awkward, strangled little chuckles, and Sarah would just smile her tight, thin, lipstick smile, her eyes signaling for me to play along. I felt my cheeks burn with a shame so hot it was hard to breathe. So I started speaking less. I began a conscious, painstaking process of sanding down the edges of my own personality until I was as bland and unremarkable as their living room carpet. I practiced in the mirror for hours, trying to flatten my voice, to erase its rhythm, to sound American, to sound white. My friendships were the next thing they targeted. I had made a few friends with other Black girls at an after-school program. With them, for a few precious hours a week, I could finally breathe. I could laugh loud, talk free, and just be myself without fear of judgment. But Sarah and Tom saw these friendships as inherently suspicious. "What do you even talk about with them?" Sarah would ask, her brow furrowed with concern. "You people always seem to stick together like that." "You people" became their favorite phrase. It was a verbal wall they meticulously built between us, a constant, painful reminder that I was an other, a separate entity living in their world. It was used for everything: my taste in music. "Why do you listen to that noise? Don't you people like anything softer?" My appetite. "You people always have these issues with weight, we need to watch that." My very existence. Each time they said it, it was another small, precise cut, bleeding me of my sense of self. Family gatherings were a special kind of hell. Relatives would gaze at me with a sickening mix of pity and morbid curiosity, as if I were an exotic pet they'd rescued from a foreign land. A great-aunt once cornered me in the kitchen, her hand patting my head. "It's just so wonderful what Sarah and Tom have done for you," she cooed. "Giving you a real chance at a real life. You must be so very grateful, dear." I learned to make myself small, to become a ghost at their parties, to blend into the wallpaper, to be so quiet and still that they might, for a few blessed moments, forget I was even there. Guilt became my constant, suffocating companion. I lived in a nice house, I wore new, appropriate clothes, I went to a good school. I was supposed to be overflowing with gratitude. Instead, I felt like a ghost haunting someone else's life. An imposter in a story that wasn't mine. I'd escape to my room, the one with the staring dolls, and fill journals with my real thoughts, drawing pictures of families with faces that looked like mine. But a paralyzing fear kept me silent. The fear of being sent back, of being returned to the system like a faulty product, was more terrifying than anything else. So I played the part of the grateful, quiet, fixed girl, hoping against hope that one day, if I just tried hard enough, if I became what they wanted, they'd finally see me. The story I'm sharing is deeply personal, and my hope is that it can help someone else feel seen. If it's already resonating with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. It helps more than you know and ensures these stories reach the people who need them most. As the years crawled by, the emotional space between us widened into a vast, uncrossable canyon. The little insults and the "you people" comments became the constant, droning background noise of my life. But as I entered my teenage years, that relentless pressure began to build into something volatile, something I couldn't contain or control any longer. The breaking point began not with a bang, but with a whisper. I was 12 years old, up late in my room, frantically working on a school project. I tiptoed downstairs for a glass of water and heard their voices coming from the kitchen. I instinctively froze in the deep shadows of the hallway. "We never should have done this." Tom's voice was a harsh, venomous hiss. "She's ruining our image." All the calls from her teachers about her attitude. This was a mistake. "Hush, Tom." Sarah's reply was sharp, laced with panic. "Someone could hear you. We had no choice. You know that. Just remember why we did this." "Oh, I remember," he shot back, his voice thick with resentment. "Believe me, I remember every single day. I see it every time I look at her." I backed away silently, my bare feet cold on the polished floor, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Remember why we did this." The words echoed in the hollow chambers of my mind. This wasn't about giving a lost kid a home. It was about something else entirely. Secret. My adoption wasn't an act of love. It was an act of grim necessity. Cover up. But for what? That question became my private, all-consuming obsession. I remembered seeing a name on my original adoption papers years ago, a name that had been messily, angrily scratched out with a black marker. Maya Jenkins. My birth mother. Who was she? And why was her name so violently erased? As if she were a mistake that needed to be forgotten. The crushing weight of it all made me start pushing back. The quiet, agreeable girl they had so carefully constructed began to crack and splinter. I started skipping classes to wander through the city, losing myself in the anonymous crowds where I didn't feel like an exhibit on display. It wasn't just teenage rebellion. It was a desperate, suffocating search for air. One afternoon I came home late, the sun already beginning to set. Sarah was waiting for me in the entryway, her arms crossed, her face a thundercloud. The argument that followed was explosive, a tidal wave of years of repressed frustration from both sides. It ended with her grabbing my arm, her fingers digging into my skin with shocking force. "You ungrateful little child," she screamed, her face contorted with a rage I had never seen so clearly. The next day in gym class, my teacher saw the dark, finger-shaped bruises blooming on my upper arm and, following protocol, made a report. Suddenly, Child Protective Services was involved. In front of the social worker, Sarah and Tom transformed into the perfect, heartbroken parents, trying their best to deal with their troubled and difficult daughter. They expertly twisted my pain, my acting out, into a convenient story about a girl irrevocably scarred by past trauma from the foster system. But this time I didn't stay quiet. In a private meeting with a kind patient counselor named Ms. Diaz, the dam finally broke. I told her everything. The decade of torment, the constant "you people" comments, the crushing feeling of being an accessory they regretted buying. I told her about the chilling conversation I'd overheard, the secret I knew they were hiding. Ms. Diaz just listened, her expression calm and validating. When I was finally done, my voice raw and my eyes dry from crying, she looked at me and said the 3 words that would change my life. "Kayla, I believe you." Those 3 words were a lifeline thrown into a raging sea. Based on my detailed testimony, CPS petitioned the family court for a formal inquiry into the circumstances of my adoption. And just like that, we were headed for a showdown in a courthouse that smelled of old paper, polished wood, and unspoken dread. Stepping into that high-ceilinged family courtroom felt like shrinking. The imposing dark wood and the elevated judge's bench seemed specifically designed to make you feel small and insignificant. Judge Elena Ramirez presided, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who didn't seem to miss a single detail. The tension in the air was so thick you could barely breathe. My adoptive parents sat at a long table with their expensive, smug-looking lawyer, both of them dressed to look like sober, respectable victims. I sat at another table with Ms. Diaz and a quiet but firm court-appointed advocate. The hearing began as a grim, well-rehearsed performance where Sarah and Tom played the roles of their lives. Dressed in a prim, conservative navy blue suit, Sarah dabbed at her dry eyes with a carefully folded tissue. "We love Kayla deeply," she began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "She is our daughter. We knew she had a difficult start to her life, and we vowed to give her all the love and stability she deserved." She painted a beautiful, heart-wrenching picture of parental devotion, meticulously leaving out all the ugly, inconvenient parts. When my advocate asked about my accusations of emotional abuse, her fake tears finally flowed. "It breaks my heart to even hear these things," she sobbed. "She's a teenager lashing out. She's confused. We have never, ever done anything but love and support her." Tom went next, assuming the role of the firm but deeply concerned father. He spun elaborate tales of my teenage rebellion, masterfully framing my cries for help as delinquent behavior. "We've tried to give her structure," he said, his voice full of false sincerity as he looked at the judge. "But there are cultural challenges. She comes from a very different background. We believe her acting out stems from her past trauma, not from anything in our home." He made it sound so reasonable, so plausible, like he was the calm, rational father dealing with a hysterical, damaged child. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened to their mountain of lies. They were actively, methodically erasing my reality right in front of my eyes. Then it was my turn. As I walked to the witness stand, I could feel their cold, hateful eyes on me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. My voice started as a whisper, but it grew stronger with every word, fueled by a decade of swallowed pain. "They don't see me as their daughter," I said, my voice cracking but clear. "They see me as a project they failed at. They hate who I am. They make fun of how I talk. They call me you people like I'm not even a person. They've spent my whole life trying to make me less black, less myself." I finally lifted my head and looked directly at the judge. "Love doesn't try to erase you. Family isn't supposed to make you ashamed of who you are." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Sarah was now sobbing dramatically into her tissue. Tom's jaw was clenched so tight a muscle jumped in his cheek. The real fireworks started when my advocate went on the attack, armed with the information I had given Ms. Diaz. "Mrs. Miller," he began, his voice sharp and precise. "At the time of the adoption, you were aware of the birth mother's identity, correct?" Sarah faltered, her performance momentarily slipping. I don't recall the specific details. It was a very long time ago." "Let me refresh your memory," he pressed, holding up a document. "The birth mother's name was Maya Jenkins. You petitioned the court to have all records pertaining to her permanently sealed. Why, Mrs. Miller? Why go to such lengths to erase this woman from your daughter's life story?" "It was a private matter," Sarah stammered, her eyes darting nervously toward Tom. "To give Kayla a clean slate." My advocate turned his attention to Tom. "Mr. Miller, a clean slate, or was there something you needed to hide?" Tom's carefully constructed composure finally shattered. "This is harassment," he blurted out, his face turning a blotchy red. "We did what was best for our daughter." Panic. It was finally visible, flickering in their eyes like a faulty light. Their perfect facade was crumbling under the weight of a single, simple question. Why? The theater was coming to a close, and the raw, ugly truth was waiting in the wings. This journey to the truth was the hardest thing I've ever done. If you're still with me, and if you believe in the power of speaking out, please take a moment to subscribe, activate notifications, and leave a like. It helps share this story with others who might be feeling alone. The courtroom was a tinderbox, crackling with unreleased tension. Judge Ramirez held up a hand, silencing everyone with a single gesture. She looked directly at Sarah and Tom, her gaze so intense it felt like a physical weight. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice low and dangerously calm. "This court has heard your testimony about your love for this child. It has also heard testimony of great and enduring pain. So, I'm going to ask you a very simple question. Explain to me in your own words why you adopted Kayla, if not out of love." This was it. There were no more lawyers to speak for them, no more scripts to hide behind. Just a direct question from a judge who was clearly done playing games. Sarah and Tom looked at each other, and in that one frantic look, a decade of shared secrets and mutual resentment passed between them. They were trapped, and in their rising panic, they forgot about the audience. They forgot about the judge. They forgot about the tiny, sensitive microphone clipped to the witness stand. Tom leaned toward Sarah, his face twisted into a grotesque snarl. The courtroom's amplification system picked up every single venomous syllable of his hissed whisper. "Why can't she just be normal like us?" he hissed. And then came the 7 words that changed everything. "We only took her to hide the shame." Hide the shame. The words hung in the air like a cloud of poison gas. A collective gasp sucked the breath from the room. My own heart just stopped beating. Shame. Was shame. Judge Ramirez froze. Her hand, which had been resting on a stack of papers, stopped mid-air. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and pure horror. It was as if someone had hit the pause button on the entire world. The court reporter's fingers hovered, motionless, over her keyboard. The lawyers on both sides were turned to stone. In that deafening, echoing silence, my mind raced, trying to connect the dots. Hide the shame. It connected instantly, with sickening clarity, to the hushed conversation I had overheard all those years ago. Remember why we did this? This was the why. I wasn't a daughter. I was a shield. A living, breathing cover-up. The judge's shock finally morphed into a cold, hard fury. The freeze broke. She slammed her hand flat against the wooden bench. The sound cracked through the silence like a gunshot. "Bailiff," she commanded, her voice like ice. "We are in recess. I am ordering an immediate and full inquiry into the origins of this adoption. Unseal every document. Every single one. Now." Her eyes bored into Sarah and Tom, and for the very first time, I saw them for what they really were. Not parents but terrified, cornered frauds. The recess felt like an eternity. We sat in a small, windowless waiting room while a frantic energy buzzed behind the closed courtroom doors. Ms. Diaz sat with me, her presence a warm, steady anchor in my internal storm of emotions. Hide the shame. The words just played on a relentless loop in my head, each repetition more painful than the last. Hours later, the bailiff opened the door, his face grim. "The judge is ready for you." When we walked back into the courtroom, the atmosphere had irrevocably changed. The crackling tension was gone, replaced by a grim, somber finality. A thick stack of new documents sat on the judge's bench. Sarah and Tom were already at their table, looking pale, shrunken, and hollow. They wouldn't look at me. Judge Ramirez looked down at the papers, then up at me. For the first time all day, her expression held a profound sadness and a deep human sympathy. "This court has unsealed the complete, original adoption file," she began, her voice steady and resolute. "What it contains is a story not of love, but of profound deception and breathtaking cruelty. She took a deep breath. The birth mother, Maya Jenkins, was not a stranger to this family. Maya Jenkins is Sarah Miller's younger sister. A shock wave of murmurs went through the room. I stared at Sarah, whose face had completely crumpled. Her sister. A black sister she had never once mentioned. The judge wasn't finished. The reason for the extreme secrecy, the reason for this shame, becomes horrifyingly clear when we look at the original birth certificate. A sworn affidavit from Maya Jenkins. An affidavit that was illegally buried by the Millers' original legal team, names the father. Judge Ramirez lifted her gaze and looked directly, mercilessly at Tom. Her voice dropped, and each word was a hammer blow. The biological father of Kayla Miller is you, Mr. Miller. The world tilted violently on its axis. My adoptive father was my biological father. And Maya Jenkins, Sarah's sister, was my mother. The math was sickening and immediate. Tom had had an affair with his own wife's younger sister. I wasn't some random child they chose to save. I was their niece. I was his daughter. I was the living, breathing evidence of his ultimate betrayal. The judge laid it all out with cold precision. Maya, young and without financial resources, had been pressured and coerced into giving me up. Sarah and Tom, terrified of a public scandal that would utterly destroy their carefully constructed image of a perfect life, devised a monstrous plan. They wouldn't just hide me, they would own me. They adopted me, using their money and influence to falsify records, seal documents, and bury Maya's desperate appeals to regain custody. They took me in not to love me, but to possess the evidence of their shame, to control the narrative of their own sordid secret. Every insult, every joke about my hair, my voice, every resentful sigh, every utterance of you people, suddenly made perfect, horrifying sense. They resented me because I was a constant, walking, talking reminder of Tom's betrayal and Sarah's public humiliation. My blackness wasn't just an inconvenience they had to manage. It was the physical proof of the lie that sat at the rotten heart of their marriage. They were hating in me what they couldn't stand to face in themselves. The final puzzle pieces clicked into place, revealing a picture more grotesque and painful than I could ever have imagined. Tom slumped in his chair, a completely broken man. Sarah was weeping uncontrollably, but these weren't her earlier crocodile tears. These were the ragged, ugly sobs of someone whose entire world had just been detonated. Judge Ramirez's voice thundered through the silent room. This is the most egregious, cynical, and cruel case of adoption fraud and emotional abuse this court has ever had the misfortune of witnessing, she declared, her voice ringing with judicial fury. You did not rescue a child. You imprisoned her. You used her as a human shield to hide your own sordid secrets, and you punished her daily for the crime of your own creation. She looked from their shattered faces to mine. Therefore, this court finds that the parental rights of Thomas and Sarah Miller were secured through deception and fraud. Effective immediately, the adoption of Kayla Miller is revoked. Revoked. The word was a key turning in a lock. It was a declaration of freedom. Custody of Kayla is hereby granted to the state, pending immediate reunification with her biological mother, Ms. Maya Jenkins, who, this court has learned, has been searching for you for the last 16 years. As if on cue, a door at the side of the courtroom opened. A woman stepped out, flanked by a social worker. She was tall and beautiful, with warm brown eyes that were already swimming with tears and coiled hair that fell around her shoulders in a way that made my own heart ache with a sense of recognition. Her face was my face, just older, etched with 16 years of worry and searching. It was like looking in a mirror that showed the future and the past all at once. Our eyes met across the courtroom. This was her. My mother. As a bailiff began to lead a sobbing Sarah and a vacant-eyed Tom away to face a pending criminal investigation, Maya rushed toward me. She stopped just a foot in front of me, her hands hovering in the air, as if she was afraid I might disappear if she touched me. Tears streamed down her face. "Kayla," she whispered, her voice thick with a love I had only ever dreamed of. "I never stopped fighting for you. I never ever stopped looking for you." In that single breathtaking moment, All the rage and pain and confusion that had been boiling inside me for a decade gave way to an aching, overwhelming flood of relief. I wasn't a mistake. I wasn't a project. I was loved. I was wanted. The family I had spent my life drawing in secret journals wasn't an illusion. She was real. I stepped forward and fell into my mother's arms. It was the first hug in my entire life that felt like coming home. The courtroom door closed on the Millers' crumbling world. But for me, a new one was just beginning. Hand in hand with my mother Maya, I walked out of that courthouse and into the bright sunlight, finally wonderfully free. Thank you for listening to my story. What started as a search for a place to belong ended with a truth that was both devastating and liberating. It taught me that family isn't about appearing perfect or maintaining an image, but about unconditional love and acceptance. My journey was about finding the courage to speak my truth, even when my voice was shaking, and in doing so, I found the real family that was waiting for me all along. What would you have done if you were the judge in that courtroom? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Please subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, leave your like, and share this video with others who need to hear that their truth matters.